Welcome to Autism ADHD TV. It is the place to be for parents and professionals. I'm your host, Holly Blanc Moses, the mom psychologist who gets it. We dive into all kinds of important information like behavior, social skills, and learning. All right, let's get started. I am so excited today to be bringing you an extra special episode. We're talking about building safe communities and understanding between law enforcement and people on the spectrum. So first I want to introduce Dr. Daniel Openden. He is a PhD, BCBAD, the president and CEO of the Southwest Autism Research and Resource Center, also known as SARC, in Phoenix, Arizona. He has expertise in developing training programs for teaching parents and professionals to implement pivotal response treatment and comprehensive evidence-based treatment model for children with autism spectrum disorder. And Lon Bartel is also joining us from VirTra. He's VirTra's Director of Training and Curriculum, a former peace officer with Peoria PD in Arizona since 1997, and certified law enforcement trainer for over 17 years. This included managing the armory, indoor range, and curriculum for the department. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
So we have a very important topic that I know a lot of professionals and parents are interested in, and that is building those safe communities. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you came to collaborate together?
Danny, if you don't mind, I'm going to take this one. So VirTra has been a major player in the law enforcement training community for a really long time. We build really high-end digital video simulators for military and law enforcement. And I've seen needs within our community, and we said, we really do need to cover a piece on individuals that are on the spectrum. My time as a law enforcement officer, I went through the academy and I never had any real training on it. We were seeing some high profile incidents that were happening across the country. I said, we've got an opportunity to really make an impact. And with what we do, it's different than sitting at a podium and lecturing, right? And that's one of my big issues from a training perspective is if I sit in front of a class of 30 people and I preach from the podium, in 3 days, they're not going to remember any of it. But if I can put them into a scenario-based learning platform, I have a chance of making a real critical change in their behavior and in their understanding. And that's what we do. So there's a couple individuals that were associated with my former agency. And this particular woman was the wife of one of the officers that I worked with. He ended up actually dying of a brain tumor. It was cancerous, but they had a son who was on the spectrum. And I reached out initially to her and I said, hey, look, I want to do this. I mean, I can research. I've done a ton of research in my life and I know how to build classes, but I need the experts. I can't do this effectively without the real experts in this. And I bring, the law enforcement expertise, but I need their expertise because I want to build this bridge. And she mentioned SARC. So I started digging around and I started calling and I called a couple times and I get this phone call from this guy and it's, hey, this is Danny and and little do I know, it's not just Danny, it's, doctor, the executive director. It's like, so I kind of lay out the foundation of what I want to do. And I think the reasons, at least from my perspective, and I had an outline with, what I'd already kind of put together. And I said, look, I can't effectively do this by myself. And I need to do it justice. Would you help me out? And SARC was amazing in that. Yeah, absolutely. And I had multiple resources and multiple people that all of a sudden I could talk to and ask questions. And, we're bouncing ideas. And the biggest thing that when Danny and I talked about the collaboration initially was, hey, look, I can't necessarily make every officer out there an expert, but if I can create a dynamic or a situation where they can come across somebody on the spectrum and just immediately think and just recognize this might be the situation, I have an opportunity to change the outcome. And something it sounds so small, but it really, really, truly isn't. If I can create that recognition in that moment, we have an opportunity to change outcomes to a more positive light. And that's kind of how this whole thing started and how it kicked off. And SARC has been amazing to work with. I had more resources and people that I could call and ask, and as we fleshed this thing out, and we found a real solid balance between the educational knowledge component and effective simulation. And without stepping into my world and what I mean, my simulator is 300 degrees around you on 9-foot tall screens with life-size characters that you interact with. So when you step in and we give you a mini scenario of a woman who's in a lobby, police lobby, who's been a victim of a crime, who happens to also be on the spectrum, and she's engaging in a self-stimulating behavior, I get to represent that, not lecturing and not, an image on a PowerPoint, but full size. And that's where I get to really make an impact. So that was, for me, it was the cool part. And like I said, I got lucky that SARC was just so great to work with. Did I miss anything, Danny?
No, it was great. Hollywood, I'll add to that just for the behavior analysts that are listening to your podcast. I mean, one of the reasons we were so attracted to work with Vertra is that Lon brought me in and showed me the work they were doing. And he's absolutely right? So we were in total alignment that just doing a classroom-based lecture does nothing to change behavior. What changes behavior is behavior skills training, right? And that was a big piece of what Vertra was doing in stuff outside autism. They had already discovered that on their own, and we're already incorporating that into all their simulators. But the second thing that Vertra was doing extraordinarily well is that they had already created lots of these simulations for what I would refer to as sort of high risk, low probability situations. In other words, Lon put me in a simulator of a hostage situation where you walk into a home. He put me in another simulator where it was an active shooter in a movie theater. Things that you can't train on every day because they don't happen all the time, but they are so high risk when you put into them. And we got to talking and said, interacting with people with autism, it's not going to happen every day, but it's going to happen at some point for police officers. And we want them to be able to pull out some of those signs that might tip them off, that I might need to interact a little differently and provide that training. And we don't want to do that in a classroom. We want to do that in a behavior skills training modality. And the simulators offered us the opportunity to do that. And then the last thing is where I was totally sold is that, a lot of this happened right after there was a major news story about a really bad interaction between a police officer in Arizona and a teenager with autism. And this was just hot news around the country and especially in Arizona. And that's right at around the time where Lon and I got connected. And the one skeptical side of me said was, listen, I've been in this field for over 20 years and I can't diagnose people with autism. I'm not for a second going to assume that police officers are going to be trained to be able to do so. And Lon said to me exactly what you just said there, right? He said in that Arizona scenario, that police officer was trained in drug enforcement. So when he saw a teenager that was engaging in self-stimulatory behavior, he thought he might be on drugs. And that led to the path of this young man getting harmed, who was just stimming on like a piece of string or a little stick or something. And so Lon looked at me and said, my goal is not for them to be able to see and diagnose autism, but if that same police officer says, this guy might be on drugs, or this guy might have autism, then we've done our job. And we were full in at that point.
And that makes so much sense. So really, when we were talking about safe communities, that's exactly true. You are going to be more likely to have an interaction with someone on the spectrum more so than these very rare situations that you brought up with those simulations. And again, if we could train some people, hopefully all the people listening and law enforcement across the country will really appreciate this. What a massive impact in building a safe community. There are many people on the spectrum and they need to be kept safe. And you're absolutely right. Self-stimulatory behavior is something that needs to be understood, not misunderstood like it often is, unfortunately. And so that is one of many important things to be looking for when you're recognizing that someone may be on the spectrum, because obviously your approach is going to be quite different. If they are in need of help and they're scared or confused, and how would you be helping in a very different way. So this makes a lot of sense. So both of you got together to, again, build these safe communities with the training from Virtra. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, so if you're looking specifically at Virtra and what we do, we're, like I said, we're heavily involved in the law enforcement community. We're all throughout the country. We're the program of record in Arizona. So almost all the academies have at least one of our systems. By producing this curriculum, and we ended up getting it certified as well, which we can talk about that later. But by building this, it's a resource that they had at the academies as well as all the agencies. And its design is, like I said, it's to be scenario based, but it's also designed so that it eliminates the ability to disengage, right? It's really hard to check out in my training if you're in the middle of a simulator and there's all these things going on. So I wanted to make sure to capture attentional issues when it came to the officers, resource time for agencies. Those were all components that we wanted to make sure that we could take into account, but also producing really high quality training. The challenge that we actually ran into on this one was interesting is there's still a lot of push in the science behind ASD. You're still seeing stuff come out, and SARC's been phenomenal in pushing that and really being able to get really good at establishing earlier and earlier diagnosis. But when we started this, our numbers or statistics were a 1 in 59. And by the time it was done, the new data was 1 in 54, so, we try to stay on top of it the best that we can. But again, it's the expertise, me going to SARC and going from that perspective. But as it rolled out, we started getting a lot of positive feedback, not just in Arizona, state of Utah. The Attorney General actually is using our curriculum specifically for their training, and they've actually asked for more. They want some additional stuff now. So in the future, I'm going to be hitting Danny up with, hey, let's create some additional full-blown scenarios that we can use in multiple modalities, not just as a testing method, but also as a behavior. We use a lot of simulation for behavior shaping. And I'm not going to, spend a lot of time on that because that's, areas that you understand, but it's really, for me, it's been very rewarding to see the acceptance within the United States and people using this program.
Right, that's wonderful. And I think everyone sees a major need there. But like you were saying, you move forward and saying, how can we do it? Yep. Right? How can we collaborate? How can we make this happen? So I did get many questions from my Facebook groups. I have a group, Autism ADHD Facebook group for parents, and also one for professionals, educators, and therapists and analysts. So some questions came in that I thought were really good. Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay. How do you find out if your local police department have any training? And if they don't, how do you go about recommending that?
Yeah, so the easiest thing is you reach out to, and you can contact what's called their PIO, Public Information Officer, or they'll have community engagement officers. There's different terms that you'll have. But ask them, hey, look, I'd like to talk to this individual. You can talk to, depending on the size of the agency, you could even reach out to their training department. Is this something that you guys engage in? So those are ways that you can find out. And as far as recommendation, having a good solid recommendation helps. I mean, obviously, I'm going to stand behind, what we've put together, and I think it's phenomenal. We also understand throughout the country that not every agency has the same opportunities. One of the things that we were asked by Colorado, and I just told Danny this the other day, is one of the agencies in Colorado, they wanted to use the material for even bigger audiences. And they couldn't bring, 40, 50 people into the simulator all at the same time, especially COVID being, one of the things we're dealing with. So they asked if we could do anything, and I had my team restructure it and actually turn it more into a presentation video with some snippets of the role play component, so that we could bring that resource out. So we built that out, and we ended up giving it to Colorado. And I keep saying the word give because that's the critical component. We don't charge for it. If you've got one of our systems, I update your curriculum as long as you have a maintenance agreement with us or a step contract with us. I don't charge for the curriculum. We just keep pushing out. And this ask, it was pretty light load and light lift. I said, okay, let's get this done so that you have an opportunity to engage more of your community. So finding some of those different opportunities. If they have a virtual system, this is something that's an opportunity for them. If they don't, try to find some of the groups in your neighborhood that might be willing to engage. Partnerships are how it's going to get done. Collaborating with individuals and saying, hey, look, I'm not the expert in this area, you are, but I really want to see some of this happen. I think that with the frequency at which law enforcement does and will continue to engage people that are on the spectrum, this is I think it should be a mandatory training. It's not it's a mandatory, my opinion.
I agree. And, I think that, of course, and so do you, that's why you're doing this, is the more people that are trained, the more people we can keep safe. And as a mother of a 16-year-old on the spectrum, not only am I coming at this as a professional, but also a parent. And, for someone to understand him can mean the difference between his life being saved. And so it's incredibly important. So I thank you for that information as far as educating us on how do we even go about finding out what the training is. And so contacting their PIO, their community affairs people, their training people, and asking those questions. That's excellent. Something very important, obviously, in this topic is we've got to include autistic people in educating. They are the ones that we're trying to help, and we have to have their input. And so autistic children, autistic adults, again, so important to put together collaboration because they are the experts. So tell me how you have collaborated with autistic adults in this venture together.
Yeah, so this was something that was absolutely critical to us when we first got started and through the entire project. We wanted to be committed to this whole idea of nothing for us without us, and that if we were going to build video simulators to help police officers interact with people with autism, then we needed to use actual people with autism.
Right.
And the struggle that we ran into, it actually is kind of a cool story. The struggle we work with plenty of adults and teens with autism. This would have been very easy for us to find them, but not all of them had the specific behaviors that we wanted to have included in the simulators. And so what Virtra normally does for these, in any other scenarios they build, is they hire actors, right? And we didn't want to hire actors pretending to have autism. So we were at kind of a crossroads. Like we want to use people with autism, but we don't want to ask people with autism to engage in behaviors they don't do on their own. And lo and behold, one of the Virtra team members found this group in Phoenix that does acting classes for people with disabilities. I think they're called Detour, if I remember right, Lon, right? And they contacted them and told them what we were doing. And then Virtra set up all their auditions just like they would for any other of their simulators, but they were limited to just actors who had autism. And Lon, I don't know if you want to talk about those auditions and then how we looked at them together and kind of looked at them and go, well, we're like being casting directors but for specifically people with autism.
Yeah, and our process actually didn't change. Chris Weiss is my production coordinator. He found this acting company basically. And we did exactly the way we normally would cast a position. We bring in the talent would, engage in whatever skills, dialogue, whatever. And the SMEs, subject matter experts, would say, yep, I think that one's going to be the best fit to represent this character. And so once we got that hook into that particular organization, the rest of it, we really followed a normal process. And it was just such a natural flow, and it made sense when Danny brought it up, that how important that was. And I'm like, makes sense to me. Let's do it.
And it's one of the things we're probably most proud of with this project, because we recognize how important it is to include people with autism in a program for helping people with autism. And so we're really proud of the fact that, you know, it was never a disagreement. There was never nothing. We were all in on the same page that this was going to be a critical part of the project, and we were going to figure out how to solve the issue of finding people with autism who are actors, and actors who had autism, to be a part of it.
Oh, that's perfect. Because again, I think, you know, more than anybody, autistic adults are going to be knowledgeable, you know, about what could be misunderstood by police officers, and being a part of this process is incredible. So thank you so much for that. So if a parent, a person, a store manager, anybody out in the community, not just in their homes, not just in the schools, but also out in the community, if they are concerned for someone's safety or the safety of others, and they know this person is on the spectrum, what information, when they call 911 for help, what information would you recommend they share?
So I'm going to speak specifically from the LE perspective. I want every bit of information I can get. An educated response is always going to, you know, be the best option out there. So if you've got somebody that's on the spectrum that you're dealing with, a child, a family member, you know, sibling, whatever it is, letting law enforcement know, hey, look, I need you to understand very clearly that this child, this individual may be 16 years old and 220 pounds. However, they have specific needs, specific communication challenges. This is what those challenges are. My child is on the spectrum, right? Say it, lay that out there. That way they have that knowledge ahead of time. Being able to do that when, you know, primes behavior, right? I mean, the whole concept of being able to lay that foundation before first contact is even made. But lay all that information out. If you have specific triggers, if specific things that you know work well or set them off, I want to know about it before I get there, right? If you know, we talk about cutting the wigwags, the lights on the vehicle because of, you know, the potential issues of strobing effects, as well as the way images will shift when you've got the red and blue lights shifted back and forth in lighting. You know, we talk about that in the training, but there are other things that if you know your child, if you know your sibling, let us know that, you know, they don't want to be touched. Well, that's where the conflict starts to occur with law enforcement, because if I start to deal with somebody, this is the person I know I'm supposed to deal with, and they try to walk away from me, which is not uncommon with somebody, you know, on the spectrum. Hey man, you can't go anywhere. And I reach out to grab their arm and they don't like to be touched. So those are the things that I need to, you know, the best information possible as early as possible. Absolutely is critical. There's nothing wrong with getting that out there ahead of time.
I'd add a couple things to that, Holly. So one is, I think Lon nailed it, right? Come right out the gate and say, my son is 16 and he has autism. And I would immediately follow that with the specific behaviors that you think may be challenging. So Lon touched a little bit on the triggers, but I think even informing him, he doesn't make eye contact. So if you talk to him, he may not look you in the eye. Officers need to know that so that they're not becoming offended or think that they're not paying attention. He's got very limited communication, or he uses a device, right? What are the specific behaviors that might alarm or make an officer feel threatened, right? And then the other side of this that I think is really important, you know, we got into this as well. We have a program at SARC called Think Asperger's, and we recognized on some level that those people that are high skilled individuals that may have got an Asperger's diagnosis when we still were using that term, they're going to be the ones that are interacting with police officers maybe without a parent around. And one of the things that we've done, we talked earlier about making sure this is a two-way street. We got to train police officers. We also got to work with people on the spectrum. I know this can be a little bit controversial. What we're doing at SARC now is teaching kids with autism, teens with autism, adults with autism, and especially those that are highly verbal, like those would have been diagnosed with Asperger's. You got to disclose that information to police officers. And again, I know some people want to respect the privacy around that, but when we're talking about interaction with a police officer, we want to keep people safe. Being able to disclose, I have autism, may make a huge difference in how the rest of that interaction goes. And so I think from a therapist standpoint, we got to be teaching people that from a young age. And while we are teaching police officers what autism is and what to look for.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna echo that a little bit more, right? I mean, I can't meet somebody where they're at. I can't meet their needs if they have special needs if I don't know what those are. I can't. It's impossible for me. I don't have any type of mental telepathy that establishes that. I need to know what it is so I can meet those needs. So that's where coming out of the gate, this is what those needs are. Fantastic. Again, more information is always better.
You can only imagine if we do both at the same time, if we really work on people with autism across the lifespan, that they don't always have to disclose their diagnosis, but in the frame of a law enforcement officer or other first responder, that's what you do. That's what providers can really be doing. And if we're doing that at the same time that Lon and his team at Virtua are helping get this training out to police officers in our community, over time, we're going to build much, much safer communities because these two groups are now communicating much better.
That's true. And I really like the way that you're saying that, because that is, again, kind of setting up, even at a young age, how is this additional level of protection? How can we educate police officers, but also educate ourselves? And like you said, I think privacy, no one should have to disclose anything they're not comfortable with across the board. But in this particular situation, it is really an issue of safety and understanding for that officer, because they're trained to encounter everything. And so how do we make that safer? How do we make that smooth? How do we get that person protected? So that makes so much sense. Another question that came in is, what if my child is being very aggressive, but I'm scared to call? They may calm down by the time the police arrive. I don't know what's going to happen. So I call, and then the police arrive and they're already calm. I know that I've heard from parents where they're afraid to call. And I think, again, when you're talking about this podcast being a part of moving us in the right direction as well, is educating parents, educating professionals that it doesn't need to be something to be scared of necessarily. If we're having this open communication, if we're saying at the get-go, when you call and say, my child's autistic, this is what they're struggling with, this is what you might see, and really starting it in a good direction. So again, if a parent calls, what would happen if an officer came and everything was calm by then?
I think you have an amazing opportunity to talk to the officer without the crisis point. And we don't want to give up that opportunity. You had the need and the need's no longer there, but it gives you a chance to talk to that officer and into responding officers. Understand that a lot of times officers will work the same beat or the same district. So you may have an officer that you deal with on more than one occasion because, the work schedule and that's their assigned area. But I would much rather have the opportunity to talk to a parent and build rapport potentially with the child in that non-crisis point when things are not elevated. I would love to have that opportunity. And I grew up in a culture with community-oriented policing and beat accountability, so that I got to learn the folks that were, in my district. And it gave me that opportunity to build rapport. So if I have a child that, has some special needs, I want them to see my face and hear my voice and interact with me at an opportunity where things aren't, at the tipping point or the boiling point, so that when I do show up and things are pretty intense, they've seen me before and there's some level of rapport, some level of recognition. But that's a great opportunity to educate too, from the parents' perspective. Hey, officer, thank you for coming. When we called, this is kind of what was going on. I have a child who's autistic, and normally I don't have any major, I don't have any issues. Every now and again, physically, I don't have the ability to deal with it when things get really extreme. And again, it's not that my child has the intent to harm. There's just some aspects of being autistic that we run into some behavior issues that could pose a risk to other people in the household. But I'd really like an opportunity. If you can we talk? Can we have a conversation? Can we educate you on my child's special triggers, special things that work, and even if if we could maybe say hello, and that way it's the first time that they see you is not when things are heated. It's an opportunity, and as long as I can tell you, as long as calls for service allow, absolutely, I'm going to sit there and take that opportunity. Don't get me wrong. If you're telling me things are calm and all of a sudden a bank robbery kicks out, I will try to be back. But it's they're the nature of law enforcement, since it can swing that way. But it's an opportunity to connect. Remember, we said this is a two-way street, and it's that beautiful moment where things are not at the crisis point, where hey, let's have this conversation.
I think that makes a lot of sense. When I used to work in Tennessee back in the day, we're actually putting together a collaborative process where we were interacting. I'm speaking about adults specifically. We were interacting with police officers, educating them on particular clients, ones that, perhaps became very overstimulated, aggression would be high frequency. So really wanting to educate them specifically on this person. And so when a staff person, the individuals I'm talking about in particular were living in the communities with supports. And when that support person would call, if they ever needed to call in to 911 or the police, that would automatically bring up data for information to how to best support that person when they came. Like you said, maybe the lights were off. Maybe they called before they came in because they had the house cell phone. I mean, all of these things that we were able to kind of build those bridges, I found to be very helpful as well. And so that theme where let's collaborate, the police are helpers, they need to have information, we have the information, let's go ahead and work together in that. Something that also came up as a frequently asked question is what type of kind of de-escalation techniques would you kind of recommend when you're talking about your training to police officers?
Yeah, I mean, there varies obviously based on the child, based on any number of components. It's one of those balance things that we had to take, where I can't give you, hey, these are the 5 things, because
right.
As Danny educated me, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. But there are a lot of things that we can do, even from just general communication, right? If I'm a large stature, right, you got a vest and a badge and all this other stuff, I could do anything to seem a little bit less imposing, changing elevations, changing the tone of my voice, bringing the level of it down, slowing the rate at which I speak. These are all just some basic concepts that, when we try to get individuals that are at a high emotional state, if we can start to bring them down a little bit, they tend to be a little bit universal. Again, though, you could have an individual that their challenges in their communication, all that stuff doesn't really factor in. If I have somebody that has to use a tablet or some type of picture communication system, then I'm going to have to meet them at their level, whatever that level is. But that comes back to me finding that out ahead of time.
Right. And that's true. Like you said, if you know ahead of time, if you're talking a lot and that might overwhelm that person, then, that would be good to know on the front end before you even approach.
Yeah. And the radio, if I'm wearing a mic, turning that down if I don't have an earpiece, and just trying to cut some of the stimulation coming from the outside. Mitigating the amount of people that might be visually seen, because if I got people walking back and forth and in and out, I've got a lot of stimulus that's kicking in, and if I can do anything to cut some of that stimulus, and just slow the pace, right? If I can just take an opportunity to just slow the pace just a little bit, all of those things are going to help. Now, again, law enforcement officer also has to take in mind their safety, because a 16-year-old kid who's 220 pounds is still a 16-year-old kid, 220 pounds, and has the capabilities. So the officer has to find that balance between safety for themselves, safety in others, and the ability to communicate. So there's a lot of tactical components as far as placing yourself in a position or room where you have an escape route, not putting yourself in a position where you're creating a feeling in that child or that individual that they can't go anywhere. If they feel trapped, I don't want to do that either, right? So standing at the only point of departure of that room, but at the same time, I need to be close enough that if things go bad, I can get out.
Right.
So we have to play a balance game, and those are all components that we want people to think about.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I like what Lon was saying earlier too. This is one of the reasons, again, I think the partnership works so well. This whole idea of working with or building a relationship with people on the spectrum, not in crisis mode, is critical. And I think behavior analysts say this all the time, right? The best time to teach the prevention of problem behavior is not while the problem behavior is necessarily happening, right? It's some other time to prevent it, to teach the skills so that it's prevented in the future. And so I love this idea of the police officer coming, the behavior's already de-escalated, and really building a relationship, helping to understand people with autism, getting to know them. We're doing this in our clinical programs now with people as young as our preschoolers, where we're just bringing police officers into the classroom, just so that people with autism have some exposure to police officers that are not going to escalate their behavior and their response, but actually feel a certain level of comfort, learn a certain level of respect, the disclosure I talked about earlier. All of those things become really critical, so that if you are in a situation where you've got high rates of problem behavior and a police officer shows up, they're not further escalating the behavior. In fact, they may represent a sense of de-escalating just with their presence and with the relationship they may already have with the individual.
I love that. And so I know some people that I've worked with, we've had lunches with police officers. And another thing is a lot of police officers now are in the schools. So they are getting, more exposure to their presence as well. But I love that idea that, let's, again, collaborate. It all sort of comes back to collaboration and education. So good. And I want to thank you both so much for coming on. I know that my audience has gotten tremendous value from this. So Dr. Openden, how did the audience find out more about you and SARC?
Well, our website is the best way to do that. That's just Autism Center, spelled out as one word, .org. And our phone number is 602-340-8717. And we're on all the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff too.
Perfect. And so I'll make sure that I have that information in the show notes for the audience. So Lon, and how do they find out more about you and Virtra?
I'm going to get to that in a second, but I'm going to address your audience. Go to the SARC website. Take 15 minutes to pull up the website, check out the resources, check out the stuff that they're doing. It will not kill you to give 15 minutes to just check it out. I'm challenging you. I'm throwing down the gauntlet. Go and see what they've done. And if there's ways that you can help or that they can help you, you need to reach out. So sorry, I had to do that. As far as getting to me, Virtra has a website as well, and they can get to me that way, or email if you got something specific that you'd like to talk to me about, and that's just lbartel@virtra.com. But if there's anything that I can do to help, please reach out.
Wonderful. And again, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a great podcast and YouTube, and again, on the Autism ADHD podcast and Autism ADHD TV. I know a lot of people are going to want to watch and listen, and I hope to have you both back.
Absolutely.
Sounds great. Anytime, Holly.
Thanks. Thanks so much. Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget to click that subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like this episode, please share it with someone. It may just be what they need to watch today. If you're a parent, I'd love if you came on over and joined our Facebook group, Autism ADHD Group for Parents. If you're a therapist or educator, come on over to our group, Autism ADHD Group for Therapists and Educators. You're going to find those links right down there in the notes. Thanks so much, and I can't wait to see you in the next episode.
All content provided is protected under applicable copyright, patent, trademark, and other proprietary rights. All content is provided for informational and educational purposes only. No content is intended to be a substitute for professional medical or psychological diagnosis, advice, or treatment. Information provided does not create an agreement for service between Holly Blanc Moses, Crossvine Clinical Group, the interviewee, Holly Blanc Moses LLC, and the recipient. Consult your physician regarding the applicability of any opinions or recommendations with respect to your symptoms or medical condition or the symptoms or medical condition of your family member. Children or adults who show signs of dangerous behavior toward themselves and/or others should be placed immediately under the care of a qualified professional.